Feeling thirsty for knowledge? Hackers on the Rocks is the podcast that mixes refreshing conversation with potent cybersecurity insights. Serving up these insights with a twist, we pair a different software vulnerability with a refreshing cocktail recipe each episode. Hello, world, and greetings all around. We often talk about the technical aspects of vulnerability research on the show. We often dive into bug classes and the tools and techniques researchers use to, drive to a CVE. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at an adjacent topic, which is the impact of those CVEs. Our guest today, Sanket, has created an open source project called CRML that looks at calculating business risks due to those technology-induced vulnerabilities. So, Sanket, welcome to Hackers on the Rocks.
Well, Ivan, thanks a lot. I'm very excited to be here and chatting with you. I have had a couple of conversations with you, and I always love chatting with you, right? I have been a hacker myself, and I just love talking to hackers around that.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, so as you've kind of shared for our audience, this is not our first rodeo here. You're always super passionate and articulate for what it is you do. And so I want to make sure that we can kind of share that with a wider audience. It is a cold day in Baltimore. We're at 31 degrees or -1 Celsius. Let's warm up with a beverage. What are we drinking today?
Well, what I have is a cup of hot chocolate. What are you having?
Yeah, hot chocolate is sounding tasty, my friend. So cheers to you. Yeah.
Cheers. Yeah.
All right. We now have our warm beverage on a nice cold day. So you've built this thing called CRML. I mean, let's just start. Like, what is it?
Oh, well, in simple terms, if I have to say, it's a way to write risks, right? Like you have a format to write letters, right? You won't write a love letter like you would write a leaf letter, right? So separate forms, right? But this is a format which helps you write risks. Now, there's a lot of history behind this. Like, why did I actually create this? What motivated me or what pushed me to kind of create this? But in simple terms, it's a declarative language which kind of helps you write risks in terms of code that is very close to machines, right? Think of it like you have Terraform, right? Which is kind of infrastructure as a code. This is risk as a code, right? So in simple terms, that's CRML for you.
And so why does the world need this?
Sure. I'll have to tell you a story for this, right? A bit of history, because you would see that anything that has been created, which has created a kind of ripple effect globally, there has been a history to it, why it got created, right? I'm a big fan of Linus Torvalds. So he created Linux because he was facing a problem. His second big project was Git because he was facing a problem. I have been into hacking for long. I started as a hacker when I was in 9th grade. That's how I got my interest in the world of hacking. Did a bunch of notorious stuff at that age. But fast forward, and during my high school, when I was in second year, I hacked 86 organizations in a single day. Reported to all of them responsibly. Interestingly, I didn't hear anything from anyone. Was very curious. I was very curious. At the same point in time, I was also working as a freelancer for a lot of intelligence work, law enforcement, and I had few people that I knew there. So through them, I got in touch with these organizations, sat with them, and tried understanding what were they going through when I sent them those. Interesting fact was the security teams understood what the impact of that was, right? What was the CVE, what was the severity, and all of it. But they do not control the finances. They do not control the responses to it. When they went on to speak about it to the management or the executives, they didn't understand. They looked at it in a way, well, we have already invested in security tools. Our business is running fine. What's the problem? How does it matter? And that's when I found out that there is a huge gap in this. And that is one of the major reasons why even after having so many security solutions, data breaches still happen. It's not because the tools are bad. It's not because the people are bad. It's because the decision making becomes delayed.
Got it. So you're essentially trying to formalize a project that translates CVE impact into, I'll say, like business person, like boardroom risk. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes and no. Right. I'll tell you what. So I've got two systems, right? Both of them are CVEs. But both of these systems are in different locations, different departments, serve different purpose for the business. Now, the risk of that system getting affected is different. So that's specific thing that I always like to mention is about risks. Let's take, for example, Odoo, right? It's an open source ERP system. Now, if I onboard Odoo at my organization versus Bank of America onboards Odoo, if you look at security score of Odoo, it would be same for both the organizations. But the risk of onboarding Odoo into our organization versus risk of onboarding Odoo into Bank of America is entirely different, right? And that's the specific area that I wanted to solve for. So vulnerabilities, yes, but there are more parameters too. So a particular CVE, take for example, on a particular system, the impact of that for our organization versus a Walmart would be very different. Right. So that's where the real game starts. Now, while we started building across that, I was looking for something. I was looking for an open source risk engine. You would be surprised to know I didn't find one in the entire internet. There wasn't a single risk engine. And I was very curious why. You know how hackers are, right? When they find something, they'll go very deep into it. Why? Then I found out the reason it does not exist is no one solved the problem one step behind it, which is to write risks. If you cannot write it, how do you make a model of it? If we look at all the AI models nowadays, if the base layer of transformers were not there won't have been any LLMs today. And that thing was missing. And that's when since I was facing a problem, I thought of creating CRML and then open sourced it, found that a lot of people found value from it. So that's the history of CRM.
And just real quick for clarification, you were searching the libraries of open source projects and didn't find one. Was your search limited to open source? Because I feel like every sales pitch I've ever heard, every conference I've ever been to, the vendors talking about quantifying risk and return on investment. And I feel like those are fairly common phrases. And it's just fascinating to me that there hasn't been to date some kind of attempt to formalize and standardize what that means. Are there commercial equivalents? Are there government equivalents? It's great what you're doing. I totally see the value. I agree with you. I'm shocked that no one has either tried or succeeded in this in the past.
Well, with all due respect to everyone, you won't find a proper risk model, right? Be it commercially or open source, right? You will find variations of that, but if you go deep into that, can you actually use that to model a risk? You would find that answer, right? I'll leave it up to the audience to find that out. I'll give one very simple example. For financial standards, right? Like VAR as a concept has been prevalent in the financial world for long. There are a lot of quant analysts that are there out. Whenever you look to model something, you either follow GAAP or IFRS. Find one of them for me inside it. You won't. So there are a couple of boxes that are there which acts as like risk simulators or something. But well, can you trace it back? Can you defend that? Can you take that as a contract note and look at that 6 months down the line and say, what are the parameters because of which I made this decision? That's where the CRML comes in.
Yeah, it's funny. What's coming to my mind is, and I'm blanking on the name, so please forgive me, my friends. But there's a project that Arstake, Hanson, and Jeremiah Grossman are working on, and their whole cause is essentially to overcome the challenge of groups talking about risk for things that aren't actually risk. And where like you might have 10 or 15 CVEs that could apply to your technology, but the vast majority of actual business damages may come from only one of them, and so it's an indirect way of trying to prioritize either pre-breach defenses or post-breach, like now what. Does CRML, is that essentially the problem that you're trying to solve through the ontology?
Well, whatever you mentioned, CRML is a step back towards that, right? So that's the first step before you move on to actually do it, right? Now, why, right? Because when you look at, think from a hacker standpoint, right? I have 10 findings, right? Now, 2 of the findings are like info level, low level, right? 2 of the findings are like critical level, right? 3 findings are medium. We often say chain formations, right? Can I use 2 info plus 1 medium to create something very critical? Right, that's how chain formation works in hacking. Right? These things are taken into consideration while writing those CRML formats. Right, I won't say script; it's a format. What happens due to this is you can see what are the dependent events, the independent events, and you can set your parameters or weightage accordingly. If you don't write this down and directly go into a simulation, the question black box always remains, how do you come to this weightage number? I say that I'm going to multiply 0.25 or zero point 0.5. Okay, but what's the logic? And we would go and say, well, this data published by this institute, and we take it, right? Now they publish that data based on data available for last year. So if an organization is publishing something this year, January, it is based on data of last year, Jan to December. If I am doing the simulation on August, I am relying on a data that is 18 years old.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like this is like a meta-analysis of the entire vulnerability management space, right? Where if I'm a company and I've got the resources, right? If I don't have the resources, I'm certainly building my own, and I could totally see that CRML is a good underpinning of that. But if I have some resources, I'm going to invest in one of the trillions of vulnerability management companies, and they're essentially trying to solve the same thing of like, here's your findings, and here's where we, with our proprietary AI mojo, say focus your energy on. And that's great in a vacuum where it's just me and my own stuff that's hosted internally. But when you start putting data on third-party servers, cloud servers, and when you start having inter-business relationships, now my vulnerability management program might say, hey, this is the top issue, right? This particular asset or this particular CVE really needs attention. And the other, the counterparty there might say, well, actually, on our proprietary system, this is not an issue at all, so stop complaining. Does CRML help kind of like bridge the gap where you have multiple competing standards and everyone talking different languages? Is that you're shaking your head for the audio only listeners? All right, can you maybe dive into that a little bit?
Sure. So you might look at there are a couple of models, right, which are used for risk quantification. Now, just taking a step back, as I mentioned, CRML is a risk modeling language in itself, right? So now the question might be, well, when you say that there's a risk quantification model, right? So you just mentioned that there are no risk engines. I just want to draw a fine line there. Risk quantification is a step after risk modeling. And that is one of the questions that a lot of time comes in, well, this is not explainable. So when CRML comes in, it can be fed into any risk quantification model. It's vendor agnostic. And that's why we have kept it open source, right? It's not something that we created and it's proprietary to us. Anyone can use it. As we speak, I can tell you there are 3 global cybersecurity companies who are using CRML to transform their own telemetry data in CRML format so that they can talk in terms of risks. Now, what happens is in CRML, if you go to the repository, it's available. You can just search for CRML GitHub and you will get the link. What happens is if you go there, you will see different schemas already mentioned there, where you can mention the departments that are there, the kind of usage of that, who is the owner of that, and all of this. Now, all of this becomes a portfolio of a particular risk. For example, me and Ivan work in the same organization. Ivan works in the research and development organization. I work in the marketing department. Right. And both of us are working in a health tech company. Both of us have a same system. Now, there is a CVE that has come up with respect to, for example, JavaScript, right? He is also using a system application which has JavaScript. I'm also using a system which is in JavaScript. We are in a health tech company. Ivan is in the R&D team, research and development team, and in the marketing team. When you look at normal vulnerability scanners or pen testing that they do, they would go on to fix every CVE that is there in the organization. As a business standpoint, my first priority should be, being in health tech, I should protect event system more than anyone else in the organization. Because for a health tech company, if the R&D data goes out, it's basically their business is going up. I can still cover up with my marketing gimmicks. So that is where exactly the modeling comes into the picture. All those context actually tells what needs to be done.
So you have first mover advantage. You're building something and you've open sourced it. So you have contributors. What are you learning so far?
Well, what I'm learning with respect to CRML and what are the kind of feedbacks that I've got, the kind of contributions that are coming in, it can become a global standard for organizations to exchange risk information in forms of contracts without revealing their own risks. And think about in a scale wherein friendly nations can also exchange information, intels, and all about risks without sharing confidential information. And that in itself can drastically change a lot of different things in terms of cyber risks. Think about this, right? I'll give you one example. Right? There are a lot of zero-day initiatives that come in. Whenever a zero day comes in, every organization is, oh my God, I need to fix it. Right? How many of the time it actually makes sense? For example, I'm a hacker, right? I'm thinking from a trade crafting point of view. There is a vulnerability that exists. What I'm going to do is, from an attacker's point, I'm going to release a zero day and create an havoc out of it. Everyone gets to fix that. I take that opportunity to get into the organization of something which I made them deprioritize and focus on a zero day and to get into the organization. If the organization knows, well, this is a zero day, that's fine. How is it going to affect me? Do I have the compensating control in place? Okay, but this particular thing that's there, which I haven't worked on, can create a more havoc in my organization. They will be like, okay, let me keep this aside. I have the compensating control and let me actually work on that. Right. So as I come from a background of hacking, right? So do you, Ivan, right? We know that hacking is an art, right? Hacking was never about technology. It was always how you craft your things, right? How you weave the chain of events. If we have to talk about risk, we actually need to bring that thought out here of how do we weave those events to a risk scenario. And as I mentioned, that is how I see it evolve. That is what I'm seeing as I'm working on it and learning towards it. I'm also learning that many organizations are taking it up and kind of creating their small SLMs out of it for their own use cases, which I'm very happy about. I know that I'm losing on commercial angle on that particular part, but I'm happy because that's kind of giving back to the community is something that I always believe in.
So on the one hand, right, you're building the structure, right? There's an ontology, there's a language that we can all speak with, inter and external to our own organizations. And on the other hand of this, like you're doing this as an open source project, which means you're going to have contributors and eventually you're going to have like disagreements over like what to structure and how to structure it and what to measure and why. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Well, I already have a lot of disagreements with a couple of them, right? But one thing that I have seen is they really bring good perspective, right? And as a person who has been running a startup, I love disagreements, I would say, right? Because that brings in a different perspective. I have seen, like, I was taking an approach, but one of the contributors came up with the approach which actually made sense for more use cases, right? And I went on to do that. Having said that, what we have done formally is we have a couple of people on the project who are kind of like managers of the like code, right? Who are looking at the pull requests and all, right? And we kind of sit and review whatever pull requests we get. We review that and then only take that into consideration. Right. So that's how we're looking at it. But obviously, as we get more contributors, it becomes accessible or more people start contributing to it. We cross the bridge when that comes in. But well, I'm enjoying the disagreements, I would say, right? Because that brings in more kind of perspective. So yeah.
Maybe I appreciate that answer. Maybe it's taking a step back from what you just said, since we actually haven't answered or asked. I haven't asked the base questions. Like, why is it even important to have a schema? Like, what does this do when there's like one one ontology to kind of rule them all? What's the why this versus maybe perhaps a different approach?
Sure. If you look at every cybersecurity data, right? A couple of years back, there was a schema created called OCSF, which is Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. It was started by Splunk and AWS. At present, every security tools follows OCSF when it comes to normalize the data, right? What happened due to that is it helped organizations rather than customers get more value out of it. At present, we do not have something related to risk. If you look at the current boom of AI and the kind of code that is being getting generated globally, the exponential rate is to the power exponential, I would say, right? It's practically humanly impossible to kind of look into everything. You will have to focus on risk. And that's the reason this is the perfect time for us, something like this to exist. Without this, people are going to bang their heads, go into depressions, have sleepless nights, and maybe the family would start boycotting them, I would say, right? Because they're going to bang their heads like anything. So
Yeah.
they need to have a good life, I would say. And that's one of the reasons CRML should exist.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're highlighting to our listeners, just rewind 30 seconds. Like that's super powerful. I agree. I think the glut of software, the glut of quickly at the speed of AI created software is going to lead to some unreviewed things, and that's typically where all of my other guests, when we talk about how did they find a thing, there's a lot of things to look at. And so understanding how, again, a technology asset could impact, the overall risk to an organization in a quantifiable manner, I think that's super, super critical. In a way, too, that I think I've seen your product, like you've demoed it for me, and I love that there's this concept of recognizing that you're not building the world from scratch, right? NIST is a thing, ISO is a thing, SCF is a thing, OSCAL is a thing, and you have all these other things that are kind of there, but mapping it all from one to another is a big challenge. And so I think it's a really enviable project that you're working on.
I would say it's someone that you can date too, Ivan.
Fair enough. Let me bring in just to try and tie it back to our normal theme on the show, which is typically we go through like actual CVEs and how do we find pointers and offsets and everything. But a lot of times once a CVE is produced, then there's let's look at the bug and compute something like a CVSS score to say like this bug is more dangerous than another bug.
Yeah.
Can you maybe, and I know that CRML is not that, right? But maybe an organization has adopted CVSS, and again, all those vulnerability management projects clearly rely on it. Can you maybe do a quick compare and contrast as to why organizations should look at one versus the other or both?
Sure. Let's take an example. You are from DoorDash, okay? And I'm from Target, okay? We use kind of similar softwares and all of this, right? So we have a CV today called CV 2026-241, right? It has got a high severity issue in version 8 of Chrome, right? And there is one more called CV 2025-55182, which is on VF Server component. Now, let's take for a moment that both of us are using this kind of architecture. What is CVSS score giving me? It is giving me the severity score. So in this particular case, it's high. So it would range between 7 to 8, right? 6 to 8 rather, right? Now, that's fine. That's the severity score of the CVE, which means how deadly is the CVE. But does it tell how is it going to affect your organization versus my organization? That's why CRML is required. How does it matter to me? How does it matter to my organization? And that's the exact small, like very fine line difference that comes into the picture of why CRML is needed, even though CVSS is there. Well, it might sound like I am saying that CVSS is not required. I'm not saying that. Right? CVS is required because without that, all these risk models cannot exist. But how does it matter for our organization is where CRML comes into the picture.
I like that we have this maturity factor, right? So the way that I view it is CVSS is basically how easy is it to exploit a particular CVE, right? Does the attacker need a lot of knowledge, a lot of access? Is there code on the internet that I can just grab and use, or do I have to like build something myself? EPSS, we had an episode on this with Stephen Schaefer. I think we drank tequila that day, but the EPSS project is basically what is the likelihood that you get popped?
Yeah.
That somebody actually takes advantage of this CVE. And then if I'm hearing you correctly through all this episode, CRML says, if you do get popped, how bad is it? And if my understanding is correct, then I like what you're doing, right? It seems like there's this natural progression to, for the first time, quantify risk in a way that, again, non-security folks, non-engineer folks can understand, hey, the impact of using this technology at our company, right? I think you were mentioning like they're hypothetical, like there's a Chrome bug and DoorDash and Target both use Chrome, but the risk may be different. Can you maybe just, maybe as we start to wrap up the show a little bit, like maybe take us through how this works? Like what is the user experience? Like how do you build this like nerdy system called CRML and make an output that bean counters can digest and use and process for their business operations?
Sure. So for the customers, right, that we have, they do not even need to touch CRM. They do not even need to write it. If there is someone from an engineering standpoint, that they're GRC engineers or they're security engineers, they can use CRM. For a customer, they don't need to even touch CRM. What happens is we integrate with the existing infrastructure that they have. They might have their CrowdStrike, Zscaler, SentOne, anything, any security tool that exists on planet Earth. We integrate with them. Once that integration is done, the data starts flowing. Also, we look at what are the different policies and procedures that they have in place, which are essentially written documents that they have. They upload that in the platform. The AI kind of gets that and stores it in the context window for that particular organization. Now it has got the baseline, it has got the data. Now it says, well, sir, you've written all of this, but you are actually not following all of this. So it finds out those gaps. Now, once that is done, it translates all of this data into CRML automatically. They do not have to write anything. That engine to convert it to entirely into CRML is done at the back. Once that is done, based on the organizational context, different things that they do and all, it models it and then quantifies the data for it. Right. So they know that, oh, these are the 10 things. Well, this requires this, like this is the impact. This second one has this much of impact. To solve this, I need to spend this amount of things. To solve this, I need to spend X amount of things. And this is the ROI that I can get out. And then they take those decisions accordingly. So that is how the entire end-to-end workflow looks like for a customer first.
Got it. All right. So if I'm understanding correctly, then as an end user, right, not a project contributor, but as an end user, essentially, I am sharing some data with, the CRML engine, and then the engine itself is just a bunch of AI glue that processes those inputs and spits out some kind of prioritization report. Is that generally like the 5 words or less explanation?
Absolutely.
All right. And now let's shift hands, because you're an open source project. You're relatively new. You're always looking for project contributors. So now I'm a project contributor, right? And I'm already scared, right? Because you've talked about ontologies, you've talked about etymologies, you've talked about, again, OSCAL and NIST and all these frameworks. To me, frameworks are always scary, right? So like, what are you looking for? How do I contribute? And what is it I'm actually doing to make your project better?
Bring more risk scenarios, I would say, right? As many risk scenarios you can think of, as much as you can go creative, right? You can just like do a pull request on the project, right? There's also a contributing guide that is given in the repo as well, right? Which would give you the entire thing on how to, like, what are the guidelines and all of it, right? So that we can keep the structure properly in the project. The easiest way to get started with contribution is write more risk scenarios that you can think of. Right. Go as creative as you can, which is the simplest thing that you can do. One more thing is, when you write a risk scenario, when you pull the project, you will get a CRML studio there, right? Which can essentially help you simulate your risk scenarios and get the result out of it, right? You can also backtrack if there are any validation errors and all that. It will tell you where exactly the error is, right? That would slowly get you into more core of the project. But that's the easiest way to get started with the platform.
Fair enough. I feel like that's a really good point for last call. Sanket, where do people who are hearing you and are inspired, where do they go to get involved in CRML? Give us a URL or something they can do to go to learn more.
Sure. Just go to github.com/FAUX16/CRML. Right. So github.com/FAUX16, that's /CRML. As simple as that.
Sanket, thank you so much. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your contributions to this, the community that we all serve, and great suggestion on the hot chocolate. Thank you so much for your time.
Cheers once again.
Yeah, cheers.